I'm Gary Houchins. I am the chair of the Curriculum Instruction Assessment Committee, and it's my privilege to call our meeting to order. We have with us today committee members Elisa Johnson, Tracy Cusick, and Milton Seymour, and Commissioner Lewis and Chair Heiner are going to be sitting in with us, at least temporarily. So we have a number of action and review items for our committee today, and we're going to try to apply due diligence to all of these matters, but we will also maybe encourage staff as you present these things to give us just the absolute essentials we need to know as a committee, and then we'll take as much time as necessary for committee member questions as well.
We can do that.
All right. And our first item here is an amendment to 703 KAR 5240. This is our Accountability Administrative Procedures and Guidelines Regulation. This is a second reading on this policy.
This is a companion regulation, really, that supports the accountability system regs that we spent a lot more time with. And Michael Hackworth has done a lot of the work as our policy advisor on this, so I'm going to let Michael walk you through the changes that we have in front of you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, this is the second reading for this regulation, and there have not been any changes since the first read. But this administrative regulation establishes the accountability program. We are amending this regulation to align to the new accountability regulation and to state and federal requirements. You should have a copy of the regulation. We can go through it page by page if you would like, but I will kind of highlight the changes throughout the PowerPoint. But the amendments are in bold and underline, and you can see strike-throughs throughout the reg on anything that we no longer wish to have. The first amendment that we would like to propose is to remove the reference of the Owed Accountability Regulation, which is 703 KAR 5200. That was the Next Generation Learners Regulation, and that has been recently repealed. So we would like to remove all reference to that regulation. We also would like to remove the reference of 703 KAR 5225. That is a regulation in the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support, and recently they have amended that regulation, and it no longer applies to this administrative procedures and guidelines. We propose that we remove language around end-of-course assessments. As everyone is aware, we have moved in Kentucky to end-of-span assessments, and they will be administered at grades 10 and 11. And our last two proposed amendments is, one, we would like to add extraordinary circumstance as a method to exempt students from testing. This does not occur often, but currently the regulation only lists medical exemptions. So we would like to add extraordinary circumstance as a method for students to exempt from testing. And then last, we would like to require that foreign exchange students be tested and included in accountability if they meet the 100-day rule. We were given guidance by the U.S. Department of Education that foreign exchange students must be tested and included in accountability. And the way the regulation currently reads, it says that they may be, but they shall be tested and included. So that's basically an overview of all the amendments we have, very straightforward. And again, they are to align with our new accountability reg and to state and federal requirements.
We did take these through our normal process of review committees such as LSAC, SCAC discussed it as well. Really no suggestion for changes.
I just have a point of clarification on the extraordinary circumstance. Are those defined kind of somewhere?
We've
So
really
there's
kind of in
consistency.
policy defined them over the years. We've had some places where we've really kind of applied extraordinary circumstances, but we've made it fit under the medical exemption. These are things that are very highly unusual.
Okay.
We have very few kids that are exempted from testing in Kentucky. I'll give you just a couple examples. You know, we've had situations where one parent is murdered during the test. We've had murder-suicides. You know, kids are experiencing great trauma. You know, we've considered that sometimes a medical, but really it's such an unusual circumstance. We've had kids taken out for protective custody where the school no longer knows where they are, and the courts are not revealing their location. So we've had these sort of unusual things, and we just think technically be better to call them something other than medical. And so we don't think it's really a change of policy as much as aligning the reg language to kind of what we've done. Because we always want to work with schools. First, our first choice is always, can you test the child? And is it in the interest of the child to test? But then if not, we try to work with the district on, okay, let's process an exemption. But very, very few kids are exempted annually for either reason.
Any other questions on this one? There's no further discussion. I need a motion and a second to approve these amendments.
So moved.
All right, motion from Tracy, second. Second from Elisa. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
So I think Rhonda and Jennifer are going to stick around.
All right.
Our next item here is approval of the quality of school climate and safety measure for the accountability system.
Right. And this is a little bit different in that the board has already set a value on this piece. And I'm going to have Jennifer walk through kind of what our, I would call them our bookends. What are some things we have to accomplish with this measure? But we're looking today for some guidance from you as we talk through a few of these issues, and then we'll circle back around after we've gone through the PowerPoint to just make sure we're all in that we see the same things we're asking for some guidance and approval of.
So a little bit of background on the climate of the indicator of the quality of school climate and safety. As far as regulations, the Every Student Succeeds Act calls for the requirement of a non-academic indicator to be included in school accountability. So every state must create a non-academic indicator that does not include student test scores nor graduation rate. So right now, we are meeting this measure with other indicators of this within the system. However, we also have a requirement from our state that there is an indicator of quality of school climate and safety that is based on perception data or surveys. So to meet both the federal requirement as well as the state requirement, we are moving forward with surveys of our students. Now, as we mentioned this morning in the presentation, on the standard setting, we've delayed this per the board's approval until this upcoming school year. So 19-20 school year, the climate and safety indicator will be included in school accountability for this coming year. So next year at this time, as we sit here, we will be talking about the inclusion of this new indicator into the accountability system. So we are bringing to you for some discussion and your guidance today what that survey may look like. Just a bit about the definition. We're looking at school climate that reflects how the members of the school community experience the school, whether it's through interpersonal relationships, teacher, staff practices, and organizational arrangements. It's really looking at both the physical dimensions of the school, the social dimensions of the school, as well as the academic dimensions of the school. So with social, we're thinking about how the students are engaging with other students. Are they being bullied? Do they feel protected and safe? When we're discussing the social aspects of it, do they feel like that they have a teacher that they can go to, someone that has a mentor or relationships there? And then finally, the academic piece is, what are their expectations within the school? Are there high expectations? Are there classroom sizes that are appropriate and engaging? So these are the type of conditions that we're looking for to glean out of a student survey. Now, when we talk about the constructs, it's the things that the pieces that are the survey would be built out of. So when we talk about a construct of safety, so it could be around personal safety, it could be about the site, the physical, or even the emotional safety of the students. The quality, we're looking at possibly caring environment, relationships, and student belonging. Because all of these what research shows is if there's a positive environment, both in climate and safety, that students will want to be at school. They'll have better attendance. They'll do better academically. They'll be more prepared. They'll persist toward graduation more. All of these positive influences on the student would lead to better results for the student. So the purpose of the indicator itself would be to provide another piece of information to the school. We talked this morning about their school improvement efforts and the use of formative as well as summative assessment results. Well, this would be another piece of information that the school would have to help them toward their school improvement efforts. So we're looking to provide an additional piece of information that they can take into consideration. So I'll turn back to Rhonda.
Okay, and let me kind of just pull one more piece in. You know, I heard a lot of great conversation yesterday at the board retreat, and I think a lot of the interesting comments I was hearing from you as members really tie back to that list.
Absolutely.
And that just occurred to me as we were looking at the list. Now, if you look on a national level at constructs that are measured, we could do a much longer list of things. There are big surveys that are out there available. Some are free for use that have been nationally developed that go into more detail about more things. But we also feel compelled to try to stick to the intent of the law that we're building this out of, which is the Kentucky law, which was very specific about the quality of climate and safety. So that's why we don't have a huge number of constructs. Obviously, the more things you try to measure, the more individual items you sort of need for the measurement. And we also want to try to keep this a sleek, simple process that's quick for students to take. Because, you know, we always are under pressure that we don't want to take too long with testing. And so we do, but we do feel like there are a couple things we want to share with you about. Here's what the thought of how to do this. We really think that our proposal is, and this was listed in the staff note, that this should be a student-based survey. So we're not talking about staff, and we're not talking about parents, but students. Now, we base that on the fact that ESSA says we need to disaggregate data by student group when it goes in accountability. And we can manage that disaggregation if we can connect the taking of the survey to the student. Now, we'd want to be careful in how we communicate the results because you want to protect the anonymous quality of the survey. So most states that are doing this kind of thing, they aggregate the data. So you shouldn't be able at a local school to say, well, I have 6 students in a group. Okay, I can tell each of these kids how they answered this. You don't want that level. So we'd probably need to look at aggregating up for any kind of public reporting or even potentially school-based reporting. And that's what other states that put these in accountability do. But it's important that we be able to say, how are your groups of students responding to these things? Because we think it could highlight that you have an issue with groups. We would expect that it potentially could highlight that. And we're proposing that it be given by our vendor that does the assessments as we move to online. There would just be a portion that would come up that would be these survey questions. And a student would sign into a secure environment. They would respond to that. And in much of the same way we collect their answer to a test item, we would collect their perception based on that item and then generate that data back to the school district and eventually put it into the formal accountability system. So a couple of things that we wanted to make sure that this process that you were okay with as well was the idea of student-based, that it be administered as part of testing, that it would be connected some way to the testing sessions, that it be done online as we move to an online environment. So we may need to do the first one as part of field testing instead of part of an operational live test. That we would have this to be a relatively short administration time, very focused on where we feel the intent of the state law is hitting upon, this idea of those 2 big constructs, and that we would develop an instrument for Kentucky. Now, that being said, most states that develop instruments, they pull from existing instruments that have had of validation and are out there in the, kind of open market source world. And we do have current contractors under contract with us for other functions that have expertise in this kind of area, both in the delivery of this kind of survey as well as the creating of it. But we would propose doing something that's Kentucky-based. I will tell you that we've reached out to a lot of different states to talk about their experiences. Here in Kentucky, you had some conversations this morning with Superintendent Polio. Actually, Jefferson County has a big experience of doing surveying. And they have one they've done since about
Almost 20 years.
almost, yeah. And so and we've been working with them, what kind of data you're seeing, how you change it. Obviously, they're not putting it into an accountability, so that puts a little different lens that we have to examine it under. But they've been very open in terms of sharing information with us on how that process has worked for them. So this, it's not a new idea. The idea of just trying to do a checkpoint of, do kids feel safe? Do they feel like people care about them? Do they feel like they belong in the school environment? We all know the value of it. I think the piece that makes it a new adventure for us is then merging it into the accountability. And we would probably need to, we may not have to do a separate standard setting. We might be able to do some discussion at this one coming up, and then mathematically be able to include it then the next year. That would be our goal for that 4%. But that is what we're thinking, as well as the process. So I'll pause there, since we've been doing the talking, and just see what your questions are, or comments, or if there's other things you'd like to add.
What grade levels are we thinking about for
We
administration?
have proposed wherever we're giving the assessment, basically. So that's 3
Three
through
through
8. And then at high school, it's grade 10 and grade 11. Now, at some point, you might expand it out, or, over time, change it a bit. But we think the most natural connection to administering it is doing at some portion as you're doing the assessment. We've had some experience with paper assessments doing surveying, but it was for a different kind of purpose. We used to survey routinely about instructional practices. So if I'm taking a science test, I maybe had a set of a few items that said, do I do experiments? Do I go to the lab? Do I have an outdoor classroom? It might be whatever is kind of interest instructionally. So we've had a lot of experience with those kind of surveys from years ago. But again, this is more about, how do I feel as a member of that school and school community? So it's a little different. It's a different purpose, obviously.
So the goal would be that all students who are being tested would take this
Take
in the
this.
spring.
That's right.
The spring of 20, but it would not count in accountability. Would that be our pilot, our validation of the instrument, or would there
Well,
be
we
a
think we
pilot
can,
before
I
that?
think that's a
Great
great
question.
question. As we've worked with our vendors that we currently have in place already that do this kind of psychometric work for us, we think it would not necessarily have to have a full scale, everybody has to take it. You can do field testing with a much smaller sample. Now, we would need to validate the instrument. We maybe want to do, I know you've probably heard of people sometimes doing what's called cognitive labs. You actually bring in some kids, they take an assessment, they talk through what they were thinking, what they understood the item was asking them to do. We've done that with other tests in Kentucky as we've changed to a new style. We could do some cog lab, probably a sort of a typical field test design with smaller students. If we can manage to accomplish all those things, we would advocate that it actually start in accountability in the fall of 20.
Yeah, we
Now,
really-
obviously, if we
and-
could not, we could back that back with the board's approval by a year.
Not just the board's approval, the General
Right.
Assembly's
Well,
approval.
that's true. The General Assembly, we've been kind of
So the General
really
Assembly
sitting on
has,
this.
the General Assembly has permitted us to not use it this year because
Right.
they know we're in
Right.
development and that we're moving
Right.
toward incorporating it next year. So it wouldn't even just be the board's
That's true.
decision. It's in
That's true,
statute
Commissioner.
that it needs to be
Right.
there. The question on validation and cognitive testing as well, I think in some ways, what we would need to do would be dependent on the route we went with whether we were developing something new or whether we were
Right.
going to slightly
Right.
adapt something that's already in place
Right.
and has been validated.
Right.
Okay, makes sense, yeah.
And, we've looked at, there are whole surveys out there. They're usually bigger than what we were thinking. They usually test more constructs. So, but we certainly have vendors who've already done some beginning research for us that we could put on that very quickly. Sometimes I think you can get information on validity of items within a survey as well as whether
construct
a
within.
construct within a survey as well. So we certainly don't think we should go out and try to build a whole new wheel.
That's not
We
our-
know it's a
that's not what
wheel.
we-
We know we can find a wheel that fits the model of the car we've got. You know, we know all of that. So we're just thinking, though, if you want to keep the focus sort of narrowed down to sort of the intent of the law, that you probably, there's not too many things that would just sort of be a perfect fit. You'd need to have a little modification on them. So that is, again, at least our thinking at this point. But you could accomplish some field testing without every child taking it. We have done a lot of field testing of late where we have every student involved because we're also testing the online system. Can they all use that system as well? But really with field testing, you can do a much, much smaller sample that we could handle to test the instrument.
And by law, if there is some sort of a problem that is going on and that comes up, what is the obligation then
Right.
to offer help to
Right.
either A, that individual, or
Right.
B, that particular school?
Right.
Where does that come into play? Is that a whole separate survey or another page that's in the survey?
Well, I think
that-
it's a couple of things, and I'll start and then please others jump in. I do think that the aggregate kind of information you could get would be important to include in your school improvement plan. So that'd be, I think, the first step that's actionable, that I would take action with. Now, if for some reason something flagged in a survey, we had an item that would allow it to flag, if we found just in data processing that a child had said something or indicated something that put them in like harm, we actually have a process now, like when we do constructed items, every now and then a child might reveal something within a test. We've had that happen before. And we actually pull those papers and get that paper back to an appropriate, we go through the district assessment coordinator who then coordinates with the counselor or the appropriate other person at the school. Now, you know, it's not a common occurrence, but
And the
if
way
a
we're-
child said, I'm being abused or something
And the way
like
we're
that.
going with this, I mean, honestly,
not a
there wouldn't
construct
be a
test.
constructed
Yeah.
No,
response.
it wouldn't be.
And the items that we're talking about aren't items where you would ask a kid, are you in
Specific.
trouble?
Right.
Right?
They would
These
be more general
These
about
would be
do I
items
belong?
that are more like,
Right.
vaguely give you an example, if you were in trouble, is there somebody you could ask?
Right.
At your school? They wouldn't be constructed in such a way that it would
Right.
flag something for an individual kid.
And then as Rhonda mentioned, the aggregate data that would go back to the school, the schools could look at it for populations of students. Like, for example, our African-American groups, particularly African-American female groups, or African-American males, or Hispanic. So give back more aggregate data as opposed to individual student data.
Yes.
And we would obviously apply the same kind of, we sometimes have to suppress data for privacy, and we would have to work through all of those rules, just like we do with test results.
Right.
Especially in small districts that don't have a lot of diversity. We will have to figure out how to meet all those standards of reporting publicly and even reporting to the school.
My only other thought is in the validation process is ensuring that it will hold together for younger grades.
Yes.
Having done some of this in my day job,
Right, right.
some of these instruments are really hard to validate before maybe grades 4 or 5.
That's right,
So
that's right.
It's one of the things I think Jefferson County's actually done a nice job with.
They're
'cause
simple questions.
They're very simple, very straightforward questions. There may even be some differentiation that they do.
There is there is some with their upper elementary and like middle and high. There is some, you know, they're getting to the same concept, but the language is a little different, a little simpler language. They, I don't think, have experience testing 3.
Third grade, that's correct. They test
However,
four.
they also didn't think there'd be a problem testing 3. It's just that wasn't the way theirs got developed over the years. They had started at 4. But they also thought third graders could take theirs, you know, if they expanded it out. Again, a little bit new endeavor for us, but we do want to be in compliance with the law. And, this is the same area that we had done some earlier work trying to link up, some course-taking patterns and those kind of things that we just really didn't have the robust quality in our data systems to do that. So after getting some feedback from legislators that our original intent was that you survey. So we have gone down the path of creating this, doing some research and then bringing to you if you're okay with this plan moving forward, or if you have these additional suggestions.
We'll also have the capacity then to do some correlations between this metric and other
Right,
student
right.
outcome data, which would be interesting.
Well, and we did, as we had our most recent conversation with the data team at Jefferson County, Dina Dawson, who was here with Commissioner today, Superintendent Polio today. She made the comment to us that, we said, do you see a pattern between performance and perception? And we didn't get into detail, but certainly you're going to see some correlations. I think everybody would expect to see some correlations. Even, if the pattern is unusual, you'd want to know, why do I have that unusual pattern?
So as a committee, what we're taking action on here is approval of basically this process that you have
Process.
described to us and these constructs of safety and climate, sort of
then
the
we-
physical and emotional dimensions.
That's right,
of the
and
school.
we've captured, Jennifer and I have not been writing, but we have wonderful people in the back with us, and so they're writing down the comments and things. Can you go and look at these other
Right.
pieces?
Good.
So just for my clarity, you'll go and do the process and then you'll bring back the questions?
Well, I don't
So
really
we-
think we were thinking about
So we-
looking detailed by question where we were.
Yeah, we don't want to bring back the questions. What we're asking the board for is approval of the constructs of the process. One of the reasons we don't want to bring the questions back to you is because these will be items that students will be responding to. And if we bring back the questions to you, then essentially you are publicly putting out all the questions that the kids would be responding to if you approved it. We want to safeguard against any possibility of coaching kids on questions. What do you think?
No, I understand that. I guess I was thinking, I know how that'll work after year one.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Well, I mean, there's some reasons why we want to go the route of having this administered as a part of
Right.
standardized testing as well, because if you do it as a part of that, then test security measures apply. And outside of a student who has as an accommodation maybe something
Reader.
being read to them,
Yeah, reader.
then these are supposed to be items that only students are taking. It shouldn't, and we're talking about in the ideal world, the way things are supposed to work, it shouldn't lend itself to conversation about the items. That would be a break in protocol.
I understand. One thing I think on the constructs, I'm fine with the safety and climate. I think that's fine if that ties directly to the law.
That's
I'm fine with
directly
that.
from statute, yeah.
Yeah. Some of the things, and I guess I'm struggling through some of what that would be like, but in the wake of the shootings, and I was listening to some of the interviews from some of the students, and they were talking about how they knew specifically about the one individual, that they were scared of this individual, and I'm just wondering, in the safety aspect of it, I know you're not going to ask that specific question, but maybe, how do we focus or make sure that somehow we're capturing if students know that there are issues or know that there's a particular student they know that's potentially violent, or that they know that they're posting that they know they can go to somebody. It's kind of like, do you know that you can go to somebody, or do you know who that person is in your school that you can go talk to about a threat or a concern that you have? Does that make sense?
It does, it does. We'll
'Cause
capture that.
Student after student
Yes.
after student has
That's
talked
right.
about this
Sure.
one individual. And I'm thinking, and given that I've got kids that just went through the high school, they know, kids know. They know who's the concern, they know who is a potential threat, because they hear them talk about it. They see the posts on social media far more than maybe we do as adults.
Sure.
So how do we build that into the safety aspect maybe.
I just don't know if that should be us, and that's up to
And
the
it may
board
not
for
be.
conversation. Because that type of information, I think really should go directly to the school and the district and shouldn't be filtered through the state education agency.
No, I agree, but I'm wondering, how much do we know that our students are being told, hey, if you know there's an issue, do you know who to go take it to at your school?
I think we can get to asking a question like,
Talk about safety.
do you know, like a perception
Yeah.
question, do you,
Yeah.
You know how to get home.
Well,
without getting to
clear?
the
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
getting to the place where we're asking them, well, who is it?
No, right, no, I'm not asking for that. It's kind of back to your example that you gave.
I immediately thought about the existing safety kinds of things that kids are, and I noticed Kelly joined us, so she may be thinking about the
I can't
same
give you any
thing.
numbers right off the top of my head, but there's a lot of work that comes out of my office around bullying prevention. There's a lot of work that comes out of David Horseman's office around guidance counselors. And so, there's a lot of resources and training materials that we're giving to local principals, superintendents, guidance counselors. We have a partnership with the Center for School Safety, and some of my staff works with them on those safety audits that they do in schools. So, and like I said, I don't have any data, but I definitely think there's a conscious effort being made from the state level to support schools and districts around that. But I mean, that's a climate and culture piece that district has to put on that principal, and the principal has to work with guidance counselors and family resource centers to have that safe environment where kids do have somebody they can go to and feel comfortable going to.
So that's something I think we could research a little bit more
I
just to see
I
what's
can
there.
come
I
up
think
with like
there
a
is
list of
as
things that
well.
I know we're doing with schools
Yeah.
and districts and get that back to you.
Well, I guess I was just thinking about the question again. I know we're not asking on the survey, the specific person or individual. I get that, but just back to the kind of the example that Rhonda gave about, do you know that you have a set person or point of contact that you could
Right.
report something, a serious incident or something? I just want to make sure that we're getting that to the kid level. I'm not sure how much we're training our kids. I'm just speaking from personal here.
Sure,
All right.
sure.
As a mom and two kids going through schools, how much of that's really getting back to the kids? Do they really know? Do they feel comfortable enough that they can go to somebody and know privately they're not going to be,
So
the
that's
target,
That's exactly the types of questions we're talking about.
Yeah,
though.
and-
That's exactly what we're talking about getting at. Not, and we're talking about collecting it not so that it's actionable, so that
Right.
we would go back to the kid, but so that we do have a picture in the aggregate of whether kids
Yes.
believe they have
That's
a
exactly what
person
I'm,
to go
yeah.
to.
And where those local leaders can see that
Yes,
data
that's
and
what
say,
I'm
oh,
thinking.
we haven't done a good enough job of making our kids
Right.
feel like they have a guidance counselor or a teacher or, someone in the lunchroom or, somebody. I think that's where that data is going to be powerful at the local level.
And that's what I'm getting at, is how do we get that feedback to the schools that, hey, the kids are saying, we're not getting to this level, whatever
That's
that level
exactly what
I think
is.
this
that's
is.
what would be in the aggregate kind of thing, so we just need to, I think we can tie it to the construct. The issue is just getting the right set of questions under that construct that
Yeah.
kind of
That's-
get to what you're saying in an appropriate way.
That's exactly where we're going though, Lisa. And it would get back to districts in that part of the accountability system is this quality of school climate and safety. So every school by statute is gonna receive a rating on that. It'll be factored into accountability, and just like test data, proficiency data, growth data, all that goes back to schools. The measures on this indicator would go back to schools as well. So you'd be able to see it at the school level and at the district level and be able to disaggregate it by student groups too.
Okay.
If there are no other questions from the committee, then we'll just need a motion and a second to approve the general framework that we've talked about here today.
So moved.
Okay, motion from Elisa, second from Tracy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thanks
Thank
for the
you.
feedback.
Thank you.
And Kelly will stay around.
Okay, so our next item is an amendment to 703 KAR 5280, our school improvement procedures. And Associate Commissioner Kelly Foster is back here, and Policy Advisor Whitney Crow.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is the second reading of this regulation, and The reason that we had to open this regulation, and we talked a little bit about the first time we brought it to you, was with the passing of Senate Bill 175 in 2019, back in the spring. So we had to make some adjustments around TSI, and all of those are very positive. And since we were last time in front of you, we've been to LSAC again and had some more conversation with myself and the commissioner and my team and Rhonda and her team. And really the big change that I wanted to bring to your all's attention since the last time we were here is on page 20 and 21. And it's just to basically clear up the language to align better with Rhonda's language. So when test scores do come out and we do identify CSI schools and TSI schools, they'll have a clear understanding of the exit criteria, what they have to do to exit that status. So if you look on page 20, line 13, it talks about it demonstrates progress on the overall score. And you can see where we've marked that out. We talked about continued progress, and there was a little bit of confusion because, you know, behind that overall score are those indicators, and our original language talked about the indicators. And just to make that clean and very easy to train on, we switched that to line up with the language in Rhonda's work around overall score. So any questions on that, Whitney and I'll be glad to answer.
The committee has no questions. We'll just need a motion to approve in a second.
So moved.
Okay, motion Elisa. Second Milton. All right, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, I think David Cook is going to join Kelly
Yes.
for our next item here, and this is renewal of the District of Innovation status for Owensboro Independent and also for Owsley County.
Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone. You have before you two districts who are requesting renewal. They have been Districts of Innovation for 5 years, which is the limit of their opportunity in the first round. These are the first two districts to request renewal. Previously, we had 4 districts that were our first cohort of districts, none of whom chose to renew their requests. So this is cohort 2, as we call them. Interestingly enough, the centerpiece of Owensboro's new application, they've shifted some of their innovation strategies, is exactly what Commissioner Lewis was talking about this morning. It's about a new career ladder for teachers in the district, and we're excited to see what they're going to do with that to try to keep more teachers in the classroom by providing some additional stopping points along the way for them to advance. So that's centered to their application. Secondly, they have been actively involved from the beginning of building their Owensboro Innovation Academy, which you all have heard about here, one of the spotlights. They are expanding that downward into the middle school level. So we're excited to have that kind of a feeder into the Owensboro Innovation Academy. On the Owsley County side, they're just pretty much continuing what they started doing, and I give them some indirect credit for a lot of the work that was done on grad requirement revisions this last year, because they were the folks that pushed us about 5 or 6 years ago on the fact that they had a lot of kids who needed some ability to be a little more flexible those second 2 years of high school with what they were taking in terms of not shifting the number of credits or losing out on math and English and those things, but making sure we understood that there are certain kids going into certain pathways that needed certain kinds of math and certain kinds of English. And so they asked for that waiver. They were the lead on that back in 2014, and they've taken the best advantage of it. And they have created what they call an alternate graduation requirement process for kids so that they can bring forth a different approach to how they do those, particularly senior year of high school, but those last 2 years. And they've had some incredible success. They've had kids every year who weren't going to graduate, who not only graduated but got their, at the time, college and career readiness number. So as you all know, probably the poorest district in Kentucky and probably one of the 25 poorest in the state, number one, top 25 in the country, poorest districts. So what they're doing in Owsley County, I think probably someone in a much wealthier district may say, well, that's not really a lot of great innovation, but it is for them. And I appreciate what they've done over the years. And they're just continuing on with those efforts to get more of their kids involved in those. Now, they don't have as much of a need for that waiver anymore because the grad requirements
Right.
have sort of eliminated a lot of that, but they'll still use those grad requirements to keep their program going. So that's the nutshell of the two applications.
Love what Owensboro's wanting to do with the career ladder. I hope other districts will take a look at their ideas to see if that's something that is replicable elsewhere to address issues of teacher retention and job satisfaction as well. I see on the Owensboro request, they had a request about changing the school designation structure for the Innovation Academy. And so we're not making a recommendation on that waiver request because it says that should go to the interagency group that makes such designations instead. Can you tell me what that?
Yeah, so what Owensboro has kind of pushed us on from the time that they started this is we have A1s, which are most of your schools, right, with an SBDM council and so forth. You have A2s, which are very limited. That's basically Craft and Gatton. And then you have A5s, which are alternative programs. And this particular Innovation Academy sort of fell into A5 status because there wasn't any other status. But we've now gone however many years, what is that, since 2013 with Districts of Innovation, and haven't really had a designation in our system for an innovation school, for lack of a better word. So they keep telling us we need that, and I know it's part of discussions, but because those designations are not in accountability anymore, they're simply something internal that KBE does to identify schools. It's not really a waiver request because they're not asking for anything that's in regulation or statute. So we're just, again, suggesting that be looked at, that there maybe is an A whatever number that we set aside for specific
This kind of
innovation situations. Yeah.
Okay. So is that something that you all will communicate with the
Yes.
district about how to move forward on
Yeah.
that? Okay. Right. And then on the Owsley County, there were a couple of denials of waiver requests that looked like they had to do with calculation of ADA for homeschool students that might be served if they just take some given class. And am I understanding this, that they don't actually need a waiver to be able to do what it is that they're asking to do?
Right, and the reason we made it specific, some language in here is, one of the things we want to be careful about in this situation is that a district may try to claim ADA for students who aren't really their students by using this kind of as a cover. So that's the reason for the language about being already or previously enrolled. So we know that student actually does belong to them in the sense of they were theirs at one time before they chose to homeschool,
So
but
do they have the option, though, of counting the ADA for a homeschool student that has never been enrolled in public school?
I don't think so. That's a question probably for finance or the folks that,
For Todd.
for Todd, but I don't think
They do.
they do? Okay.
So long as they're a resident of the school district.
Right.
And the district the district doesn't have to, but if it chooses to allow homeschool students to take a few classes and not have a full-time enrollment, they
And
can.
they become enrolled on some part-time
It's-
basis.
that's
and
right.
then-
Secondary enrollment
That's right.
in the
Right.
student.
And there's a
management.
mechanism for them to claim seek funding for that portion of time.
Okay, yeah. As long as they understand how to make that work for them,
Yeah.
I think that's great. Okay, good. Other questions about these Districts of Innovation renewals?
You asked what I was interested in, so.
Okay. All right, well, in that case, we'll need a motion and a second to approve these renewals. Tracy with the motion. Second from Milton. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries, and please extend our commendation to both these districts for the good work that they've done, and we really appreciate. We'd love to see even more districts go down this path and explore some of these kinds of innovations that they're after. So thank you for your work with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
All right. Next up, we have adoption of policies for the Kentucky School for the Blind and the Kentucky School for the Deaf. And so we have Associate Commissioner Greta Hilton and Division Director Kevin Stoll. Hey.
Hi, good afternoon. I want to take just a moment before we jump into the policies to just share some good news that we recently learned about in my office. I don't know how familiar you are with the annual performance report that's required of special education. Every year we are required to submit an annual performance report on how well we've done toward our state performance plan, which are targets that are compliance-focused and results-focused for students with disabilities that we set every 6 years. And so this year, I just want to share that we just recently, like within the last couple of weeks, got our letter from the U.S. Department of Education that we met those requirements, which is a really big deal. We were one of 22 states to actually meet requirements, 22 states and entities. The entities are included, so there's a total of 60. And being the competitive spirit that I am, I actually looked at all of the states to determine where we actually were in ranking order, and we were 10th in the nation. So that is something to celebrate. We still have a lot of work to do. I'm not saying that we are by any stretch, as good as we need to be, but it's still something worth celebrating, and it gives us an idea of some areas where we need to improve. So
That's great.
I just wanted to take a moment and share that with you because I think sometimes we don't always spend a lot of time on good news items, and so I wanted to do that. So
Leadership, Greta, and your team, you guys are doing an outstanding job.
thank you. We appreciate that. We are working hard and trying, and we appreciate the support provided from all of you and all the leadership here as well. So we will keep doing what we do and move forward. So before you today, what you have are basically just the updated revisions to the policies for Kentucky School for the Blind and Kentucky School for the Deaf. This is just the annual update that reflects any changes that needed to occur as a result of the previous legislative session. We actually follow the KSBA model policies just like all local school districts do. These are adjusted a little bit to allow for the uniqueness of KSB and KSD, but otherwise they're just standard policies for both schools.
Thanks. Questions from the committee? Okay. Hearing none, then we'll just need a motion and a second to approve these general policies for KSD and KSB.
So moved.
Okay, motion from Elisa,
Second.
second from Tracy. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations
Thank
again on
you.
the good work of
Thank
your
you.
team. All right, and speaking of updating policies, we have annual updates for the Kentucky Tech policies, and we have Division Director Tom Thompson on his way up to share that information. Hey.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So similar to KSB and KSD, these are the annual updates from KSBA to bring them in line with current statute. And if you've got any questions, or would you like me to go through any of the changes?
If there's anything of great significance, you can tell us about that, but otherwise, just,
There's not.
okay. All right. Committee members, any questions about anything you see here that you're concerned about?
I just have a question. Just,
Yes.
does this apply to all of the area technology centers or only the ones that the state operates?
The only ones that state operate, yes.
Okay. So the others fall under the local school districts' policies, so, okay.
Okay. Hearing no other questions, then we'll just need a motion and a second from the committee to approve this policy update.
So move.
Motion from Milton, second from Tracy. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tom, would you like to stick around? I see you and David have a couple of items on the review list, and so if it's okay with everybody, we'll just go ahead and do their items. Is that okay? All right. So we'll just jump down to number 3 on the review items. This is an amendment to 780 KAR 2040, the live, is it LiveWorks or LiveWorks project? LiveWorks
LiveWorks
projects.
project.
Okay, talk to us about this one then.
So
Yeah,
ba-
Tom, just go ahead.
Okay. So basically, in 2013, we moved from the Cabinet for Education and Workforce Development into Kentucky Department of Education. So there's some language around that that's been changed. Some of the statute numbers have been updated. There's really no huge changes on there. If you've got any questions about those in particular, the ones that we did, I'll entertain those. But most of it's just to clear up the language for those two regulations. This is a first read
Right.
for the live work one.
Questions from the committee?
Didn't have
All right. Well, these are review items, so we don't have to vote on these. You're just bringing these to us. So if there are any other changes as you work on this between now and next time, we'll take the vote on the final version
Right.
next time we meet.
Thank you.
All right, great, thanks. And then we also have amendment to 780 KAR 2060, discipline of students.
This was similar, and both of these had gone through LSAC, and there wasn't any huge changes to these. They were still bringing the language in line with that move that we had and changing the regulation or statute numbers. But there was a little bit of a question about the Area Technology Center having the right to suspend a student from the Area Technology Center, and that counting toward, if it was a special population student, if that counted toward the 10 days. And some of that was cleared up during the conversations. Todd Allen had helped clear up some of the questions on that. And then there was a question about the ratio of special populations and the ATCs versus the regular population, and the ATCs are typically about 12%, and the regular runs around 10%. I don't think there's anything huge in those, but if you've got questions about them, we'll entertain those too.
Any questions for Tom or David? All right, if not, then thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank
We'll
you.
have second read next time you're up.
Thank you.
Okay, two other review items here. We have Division Director Pam Moore and Program Consultant Teresa Rogers with an amendment to 704 KAR 3303, required academic standards.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for having us. So I guess we're going to flip those. On my sheet, it had.
Okay. You want to do the career studies
Well,
stuff
no,
first?
we can go ahead and do the one that you just mentioned
Okay.
first. So basically what that is, that item is just a proposed amendments to the existing regulation of 704 KAR 3303. Because the new standards that we're going to discuss in just a moment are going to be promulgated in a new administrative regulation. We just need to clean up the language in that to remove that language and all reference language.
Yeah, and that's a
Vocational
process we
studies.
followed with the adoption of all of the new standards that have been
Absolutely.
processed over the last year.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's what's involved there.
Right.
So we'll back up now, and we'll talk about the new standards that
Great.
we've worked on. So the proposed administration regulation for 704 KAR 8080 required academic standards for career studies and financial literacy. In your packet, you've got the proposed regulation and all related regulations directing the development of those standards. And as you mentioned, that process was already established and in place, so we followed those guidelines. Teresa Rogers led the work on the development of the new financial literacy standards, as well as the revision of the prior vocational study standards, which are now career study standards. So I'm going to turn this over to Teresa to share with you and just sort of walk you through that process and the timeline. And of course, this is just the first read, and we'll take any feedback that you have.
Okay, so what you see here, the Kentucky Academic Standards for Career Studies and Financial Literacy. This falls under 704 KAR 880. And these are, even though we're from the Office of Career and Technical Education, these are Kentucky Academic Standards that goes K-12, but it lives in our house at the moment. So Before that we get into the specifics of it, the structure of this differs quite a bit than what you've seen with the reading and writing and social studies, all of the others, because we had several legislative pieces that factored into this. So, of course, you're going to have careers in career studies, but because of KRS 158-1413, the essential workplace ethics instruction, the committee felt that that was really just a repetitive thing with the employability skills. So they wanted to replace the employability domain and call it essential skills. So when you look at the standards, you'll get to see that. Another thing that we had to consider was the financial literacy high school graduation requirement that's mandated by KRS 158-1411. So there were already financial literacy standards within the old vocational study standards, but we wanted to align it to meet these requirements.
And that's one thing that I think Teresa and the committee were very intentional about, was streamlining this and ensuring that this was a package deal for schools, sort of a one-stop shop, so that these standards would be developed in such a way that it would address all those essential components.
So our developmental timeline, I won't go through these, but because of those two requirements to revise the career study standards and develop the financial literacy standards, we actually had two developmental teams. The timeline that you see here, it mirrors exactly the same process that we use for reading and writing and social studies and math. So those dates are, we went through the 30-day public comment period, a 30-day application for our team members. So all of that process was followed. So here you see the timeline for career studies, and here you see the timeline for financial literacy. So again, there were two teams involved with this. The process, this is just a graphic of who that we've presented it to, the public comment period, the team applications. So again, following that same process. But here I would like to spend just a minute talking about the two different teams that we had. So on the left, you'll see the career studies, and on the right, you'll see the financial literacy. And the team makeup for this was much different than what you would see with the reading and writing and the other academic standards. So we felt it was critical to bring in business and industry partners to give us those big pieces that we wanted. So you can see for the career studies, we had 4 stakeholders from business and education. And then because these standards go K-12, we had an elementary, middle, and a high school educator, or 2 high school educators, and then a post-secondary educator. The revision and writing committee was about what you would see with the other standards, but our numbers, we had a significantly smaller number of educators, but spread across the grade bands. And then we pulled in 2 teams to develop the financial literacy standards. And you see that we have 6 stakeholders from the financial field. We had 4 educators, but the makeup of those were different than what you saw with the career studies team. And the reason for that was because they were working towards those high school graduation requirements, so we wanted their influence. And the revision and writing committee, you see here that we only had high school educators and then 2 post-secondary partners. And please stop me if you have questions. So the developmental teams across both groups of standards, you can see that we pulled in both academic and career and technical educators. We had the Associated General Contractors of America represented. So you can see all of the different industries that were represented in our team makeup. So there was a lot of support. We had so many I think we had over 100 applications for people that wanted to serve on the team.
Good problem to have.
It was wonderful. The vision that the writers had for these standards were that the students would graduate from high school with the knowledge and skills that they needed to become successful lifelong learners. And they were really intentional about wanting that integration of career exploration across content areas, that it doesn't live outside of those general ed classes, but rather how that the general ed classes can influence careers in the world. So we really wanted to enhance the learning of the academic standards. Of course, essential skills was critical to this piece, as well as, just helping the students to uncover their skills and interests and aptitudes and how that best makes a fit for their choices. And of course, financial literacy was a big piece of that as well. The organization of the standards, we have 3 domains: essential skills, careers, and financial literacy. And these are arranged by grade bands. So there's a primary, intermediate, middle school, and high school grade band. And that we have a coding specific to this document, but it's pretty straightforward. And we've included resources to help teachers work through those processes of breaking that down. And then I want to take just a moment to highlight what you'll see in these, because we have several pieces that influence this. So the essential skills, I've already said that it replaces the employability skills domain, and it was written in response to KRS 158-1413. You'll see in the image of the standards there, those gray strands, those are the actual pieces that were written into that piece of legislation, and the writing team took each of those to develop standards that would reflect that quality or that characteristic for the students. One piece that we were asked to include in this was speaking and listening. If you remember back from the reading and writing standards, speaking and listening was removed from that. And as a literacy consultant at the time, it was just heartbreaking, not only to me, but all of the teachers on the team. It was because we know the importance of that skill for our students today, and it's becoming more so as students are losing some of those interpersonal skills. So we were asked to include those in here. So what we did, communication was a piece of the essential skills. So we worked with the LA consultants to determine how that we can best structure that standard or that domain within this. So we worked back and forth in collaboration for their input. So, I think it's a really strong piece that you'll find in here. And careers, this was a domain that was there in the old vocational studies standards. Not a lot has changed. We have added some language to highlight the 16 Kentucky career clusters, as well as we wanted that connection to the individual learning plan. So not a lot of difference other than cleaning it up to try to make it very clear for the teachers and the students. And the financial literacy, we have, this one is from the intermediate grades, but what you'll see here with the strands, the careers, education, and income, credit and debit, those were determined by the Financial Literacy Business and Education Committee. Their charge was to look at those big buckets of information that students needed to know to be able to manage their personal finances. That became those gray strands that you saw. They took that information and they put some kind of high-level bullets, pieces of information that they wanted to see woven into those standards. And the beauty of this document is those strands progress from K to 12, so that students are introduced to credit and debt in that primary grade, but of course, always in developmentally appropriate ways. But hopefully by the time the students get to 9th grade, they'll have a strong foundation to be able to talk about some of those difficult financial literacy topics, such as insurance and risk management. So I think the writing team did a great job on that.
And before you go on, I just want to add that we were intentional, and the committees were very focused and intentional on the fact that they wanted to include the high school financial literacy standards, have those in the or in the career studies standards rather than two separate documents, so that we could see that connection and that progression across the grade bands, and have that together as a comprehensive document and still meet the requirements put before us in the law.
So, we did put the standards out for public comment. This was public comment on the old standards. You'll see that there were only 83 people that responded to it, but it was out for 30 days. And you can see some of the approval ratings here at the top, but most of the comments were, if you're familiar with the old vocational study standards, they were extremely long and wordy. So that was the majority of the comments that we got, that they needed to be more concise and flow a little bit better. When we did the second public comment on the draft standards, you'll see that we had 418 people respond to it. And our approval rating was extremely high on these standards. Everything received at least an 80% or higher approval rating except 2%, but that 2% had a 77 to 79% approval rating. We did have just a few comments about language that needed to be clarified. The team came back together and they took those comments to address those in their revisions. I also presented the standards to the Gifted and Talented Advisory Council, and their concern was just for students who were seeking to earn as many dual credit or articulated credits as much as they could in high school, and their concern was, how are they going to have time to take another course? But we know that the legislation doesn't require a specific course or credit, so their concern has already been met. And then we did an online focus group with special educators just to see how that they felt that this would apply for their population of students. Did they see any concerns or anything that might not be attainable for their students? But the feedback that we had from them was very positive. A lot of the things that they asked for were instructional resources, and we know that that goes to the curriculum piece and not the standards piece. So that is a broad, quick overview of our standards. Do you have any questions?
I think probably just a clarifying comment for anybody who is listening and interested in this particular topic, that these standards are not part of the state accountability testing system. And so students won't be tested on these standards. It'll be up to local schools and districts to figure out the ways in which they want to assess whether students have mastered these skills. And they have an incentive to do so in that so many of our districts are now working on their graduate profiles or their backpacks of essential skills that they want to ensure that every student has and have mastered at different grade levels. And so this will be essential to helping those districts clarify the actual work that students will be doing and how they'll go about doing that. I guess then by way of question is, what kinds of supports do we anticipate eventually offering districts as they seek to figure out how they will assess whether students have mastered these standards?
We are working on that. Our first kind of bucket of work is helping schools and districts to see where there might be holes in their instruction, kind of looking at the standards to see what opportunities, especially targeting that middle school grade band, because we know that that's a critical time for students to really look at their interests and abilities and skills, as well as exploring other opportunities and skills, so that as they're getting ready to make those critical decisions going into high school. So we're looking at what kind of resources and support that we can help schools to do as far as the implementation of the standards. Now, helping them as far as any further assessment of that, I don't know that
I don't think we focus so much on how they assess it as providing the resources for implementation and working with multiple groups to determine what are the best resources that align to the standards. One thing I will add is we're about to launch a project around middle school career studies and career exploration that will align directly to the standards to help in the implementation of those standards, particularly at the middle school, and then phase that down into the elementary grade bands as well. And we think providing that kind of a support and then having the staff in our office being able to answer those kinds of questions and provide those supports will make a difference as well. So we're excited about that work. And there's just been a lot of stakeholder involvement in this. There's so much interest, I would say, particularly in the financial literacy standards. The stakeholder involvement has, I think, really made this a real solid piece of work.
The questions or comments from the committee?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're grateful for all the effort that went into this from staff and then also from the committee that has done all of this great work. So please extend to them our thanks for their contribution. And we'll see you back for a second reading and final approval next time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Unless I'm mistaken, I think that concludes our business as a committee. So we will just need a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Lisa, motion, second from Tracy. All in favor of adjourning?
Hey.
Aye. All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank